G'day and welcome to Inforunners. I'm Execute. Today I'm joined by Drazz3n and Ese. How are you boys doing?
Doing well.
Haven't had
Doing
you
great.
military boys on for a while. It has been a hot minute. And before I talk about what we're going to talk about today, we actually recorded this episode with Kirby way back in October, but there was some really bad sound, and so we didn't put the episode to air. We tried several times to get back together to do it again, and it didn't eventuate. And with the news this week of the Centurion on the way, we thought, well, we're going to have to get back to do it again. Unfortunately, Kirby wasn't able to make it, but a shout out to Kirby. Thank you for your information from last time, and hopefully do you justice and apply it today. So, where do you want to start, boys? With the, I think we start with the Ballista and Spartan, yeah, and talk
what currently exists.
Yeah. So take it away.
Well, I mean, I don't even remember when they announced that the platform was the Atlas. It was after the Ballista was released. It's been like, what, a year?
So the Ballista came out, and it was kind of like a bit freestanding, and then just before the Spartan came out, they mentioned that it was an Atlas platform, and when we first heard of that, we thought it was the Titan because Atlas was a Titan, but then after we found out what it was, that's when we did that episode that never ever made it to air. And basically, well, I guess that's what we're going to talk about today, but basically the different weapon platforms and how the military currently does it now, and what we saw coming. And the funny enough is I really wish we'd released that episode because that's essentially what's happening with the announcement of the Centurion. But we'll elaborate and go over that again today. So, yeah, so basically you've got the Ballista, that is anti-air missiles, and you've got the Spartan, which is essentially an APC, yeah?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So, is there anything you want to add to what they are, so to speak, Drazz3n? Is there anything you want to speak to on the Ballista and the Spartan? Is there anything that's special and unique about them, or is it really they are just, how do I put this, a platform where the weapons change, essentially?
No, I think that's exactly it. Something we'll touch on today is it's a wonderful platform that can be, interchanged by probably just CIG to really be a jack of all trades platform that they can do a whole lot with. There are many, many different ways they can take the platform to essentially provide some sort of service on the battlefield or just an area of operations in general.
Yeah, I would add that if we're looking at currently what it looks like what they're trying to do with this platform, and hopefully the Nova platform eventually to the Tonk, is that they're trying to cover all the necessities of the battlefield on ground so that you're not reliant on air power. Because there's a combination in joint operations, air dominance, and then you need to have something on the ground, right? Because if you might be dominant in the air, but if you don't own the ground, you own nothing. As far as planet side.
I can't quite remember where the last episode started or how it kicked off or who thought of it, but I remember at one part I was talking about, we were looking at the footage of the CitizenCon demo with the 400i, and they had like fixed weapon placements, and I remember us talking about how you could take those and essentially put them on the back of a truck, and that's where you guys mentioned to me that's kind of what they do in real life. So one of the parts that I remember was that some of these things, like, so let's say the Ballista turret, you could eventually see something like that as a fixed installation as well. So this kind of goes beyond just the Atlas platform potentially down the line, yeah?
100%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to make that long story short, whatever you end up seeing on the Atlas weapon platform as a thing could also be a standalone turret. And we know that CIG like to modularly do things. So if you can do it for a vehicle and you can do it for a building, so to speak, or an installation, I can see that totally being a thing because it allows, two for the price of one. So, yeah.
And that's real life. I mean, if you look at these platforms, you might see a Crow system is a remote turret system that's currently. And you might see that mounted on a vehicle. You might see it mounted on a tower. You might see it mounted on a completely different vehicle. It's a modular system. It's designed to fit on various platforms to get flexibility.
And we will go over some of the other platforms that you boys expect that we may see towards the end. Yeah. So yeah.
Mhm.
I think that kind of covers it. Do you want to go on to the actual Centurion itself? Drazz3n, do you want to kind of tell us your thoughts on your initial impressions of the Centurion?
Yes, it is. It's really unique. With the Ballista being more of a long-range interception kind of platform, people have always been kind of curious to see what we would have at a bit closer range. And I think the Centurion really answers that question for us of something that could fit in that role and perform it very well. With the massive amount of guns that it has on it, it's something that's going to deny any air assets, I would say, extremely well. We'll have to see how it actually performs in game, but anything coming in close range that can make it past any anti-air assets that you might have in the area, this could be a bit closer to some place that you're living in or an area you're holding down, maybe a FOB. This seems like it could be a vehicle that could perform that job of denying air extremely well with its loadout that we're seeing currently.
And ironically, too, my first thought when I saw it was it's essentially a turret. That the turrets they have outside the quests at the moment. It's essentially that little installation site, like I was saying before, but just on the back of a truck. Is that kind of how you initially saw it too, Ese? It's the closest thing we've had to what we were talking about.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that's what the asset was designed for. And if you look at the design of the Centurion, they clearly jazzed it up from what the Ballista is. So you can see different art assets on the back. They're definitely trying to differentiate the vehicle, but when you get to the core of what it is that anti-air turret, just a size 4 anti-air.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to, because this is a lot harder for me to do, but I guess you guys could do it because of your knowledge base. But what are the strengths and weaknesses, excuse me, specifically between this and the Ballista? Because this is layman, so I'm going to have a quick go at it. So for me, the Ballista's probably got further reach, but it's got physicalized missiles, so it has less shots. Is that kind of where it is? Where this has less range, but because they're energy based, it can kind of just keep going. So they both have a slightly different role. Like one sustained, where other is burst. That's kind of how I look at it.
I'll jump on this because this is one of the conversations I've had in the supporters chat on Discord. The Ballista, so there's a difference between missiles and anti-air rounds, putting out of anti-aircraft flak, basically. That's pretty much what the Centurion is. It's intended to be a quote-unquote flak cannon for incoming air. One is designed for distance, as Drazz3n already said. So the Ballista is designed to look out further, let's say 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 meters, see the threat and intercept it before it gets close. The Centurion's job is not to reach out that far. The Centurion's job is if it makes it past those missiles to then use that overwhelming firepower in short bursts, be able to take out whatever that threat is. So there's a different, really difference between the two is range, power, because if you really think about it, the Ballista is definitely more powerful. It has far more firepower as far as the ability to take out a craft. The Centurion is you're too close for comfort. I'm going to make sure that you can't get any closer type of.
Drazz3n, would you say that the Centurion's a bit more multi-rolled as well because of those rapid laser guns? It could also shoot more ground targets as well. So like you might actually, I'm going to crazily say like a Nova tank. Would you attempt to ever take on a Nova tank with this, or do you think it really is still anti-aircraft?
That's a really great question. Any weapon system that we see where it's missile versus different kind of guns, I think as long as you can point it at the ground, it can really be used in whatever way you want. And that's kind of the beauty of the Centurion in that aspect. Is it meant for things like that? No. Could players be creative and use it like that? Absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the Germans, or Axis as they used to call themselves during World War II, they actually had flak guns that they used against tanks as well? It was dual use, wasn't it? Remember? Yeah. And that's kind of where I got the idea from. But yeah, sorry.
That's a very common tactic, actually. In fact, it's being used today in Eastern Europe, where if you use what you have, right? So if the air threat isn't there, but you have a ground threat, you're just going to lower those barrels and use what you need to do to take out the. So yeah, I mean, I think we're all in agreement in this. It's definitely dual use. It has more use than just taking out aircraft, but plus we haven't even talked about the second turret, because it has a smaller turret in the front that's driver controlled. That's 2 size 3s, which just is a ridiculous amount of firepower for the driver.
Yeah.
Far exceeds the other platforms. And it's clearly intended to be an anti-vehicle, anti-personnel weapon system to protect the vehicle, while gunner in the back is looking for aircraft. So it's got a huge amount of firepower for any platform.
It makes me think, so without going into other kind of platforms of this, but it makes me think of just changing the rack alone. Like, what could you get to? Because if you've got the four guns, can you do one that's got 2 guns? Can you do one that's just got 1 gun? You see where I'm going with that? And so therefore, essentially, you could turn it into a sniper turret, and it's literally like an Ares, but for the Atlas platform. And like you said, the same thing with the driver. So the driver becomes a more generalized cover, where the other guys like the sniper, and they're like driving around as the pair, and they're working together and stuff like that. But I don't know if they're going to do that. But that very well could be a thing, in the future, where they just allow you to put on what guns you want to put on by changing the rack.
I mean, it adds flexibility to gameplay. I when we get to the possible future variants, I have a thought on that, so I'll save it.
Because I also have that on even the Ballista itself. Again, you're talking about ground to air missiles. What about ground to ground? And a whole
Or
bunch of
artillery
other
rounds,
stuff.
right?
Yep.
Like rocket artillery. Like there's tons of potential there, but we'll get to that.
Well, even dare I say something like the A2, where it just fires the A2 bomb across and it just drops down. But yeah,
That's like the ultimate troll.
that'd be funny as hell. But yeah, yeah. So tell me some of the drawbacks you see to the Centurion then as well. So yeah, Drazz3n, you want to tell me some drawbacks, or I don't know, you don't think there's any drawbacks?
I mean, are we talking about in-game drawbacks or just drawbacks as a whole?
Well, what you suspect will be some weaknesses of this? Because to me, right, it seems more like more of an all-rounder compared to the other two, where the other two seem to be a bit more niche, like the missiles and the, it's an APC. Like an APC is pretty kind of more generic.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a vehicle that's going to take out larger ships very easily. I think popping smaller fighters, it's going to be great. I think you'll see it struggling to take out larger threats or multiple threats that are just larger in general. Larger shields doesn't necessarily have to be larger size, ships, but I think its drawbacks are not as big as something compared to the Spartan or the Ballista, for sure. It definitely has some drawbacks, but I mean, comparatively to the other two that we've seen so far, it probably has the smallest amount, only because of the current game environment we're currently in right now. It has a lot of different uses outside of its intended role. So I would say somebody getting that vehicle could probably explore a couple different gameplay functions and scenarios where they could use it to some range of effectiveness versus the other platforms where, or the other variants where it might not be as useful.
So you just give me another question there, and either of you guys can jump at this one. But do you honestly think that they're going to pair the Spartan and the Centurion together quite a bit? Because it sounds like they have overlap.
You mean the Ballista?
Sorry, yeah, I meant the Ballista. Yeah, Ballista and Centurion. Sorry, they've already broken their own naming convention. We talked about this before the show. It's terrible, but yeah, Ballista and Centurion, because I think they overlap a bit. Like where one falls short, the other covers. So if they're together, and I can see someone smacking both of these in, say, something like a C2 or whatever, and just dropping them off, and they work together in a team of 4.
100%. Yeah, I mean the Ballista is really I need to take out a Retaliator, I need to take out an A2 or an M2, because this just won't have the firepower. This is intended to protect the Ballista, to protect vehicles and the soldiers around it from close air assault.
Would
So
you
when your Redeemer comes in, this is your counter to the
would you say this is more anti-fighter?
yes, 100%.
Where
Smaller vessel.
and so the Ballista is more, excuse me, indigestion again. More large, medium large ship, like Constellation size, or
I mean, the Ballista is whatever you want it to take out, because the Ballista is what, size 5 is the largest in the Ballista, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
The large ones are size 5.
I think so.
That's overkill for a Hurricane, right? I mean, you don't need to use that. So it's really, the Ballista is intended to reach out and touch someone, take them out before they even get to you. This is designed to protect that Ballista, that Spartan, that tank, whatever you have there. It's designed for those. It's basically, if you saw 3 of these in a formation, it's like basically the equivalent of a mini hammerhead. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's there to protect the ground.
It's actually funny you mentioned the Hurricane, because the Hurricane's also made by Anvil, and I feel that's essentially what this is. It's the ground version of the Hurricane. If they called this the Tornado, I would have been like, yep, cool, no problem. Because like it's tit for tat. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what it feels like. It really feels like it's just the Hurricane turret mounted on the back of where the Ballista used to be. So yeah,
I mean, even the front turret, like, it's basically almost the equivalent firepower of a Hurricane.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think for right now, we have the Centurion can handle the very close up stuff. Then we have the Ballista to handle the further out stuff. I don't think you're going to want to use the Ballista on smaller ships. Those ships can evade that. It's not going to be a worthwhile use of those missiles. So right now we have something for very close, something for very long. Maybe we'll see something to kind of handle that intermediary range of, okay, maybe it's not a ship that's worth throwing a Ballista missile at. It's not close enough to engage the Centurion's weapon system. It's not going to be effective at that range. So I think both of these paired up would be a very lethal combination, but there is still enough room for, say, a ship that a Ballista isn't going to waste a missile on, but the Centurion either can't hit because it's not that close yet, or it's too big of a ship for the Centurion weapon system to take it out. So there's still that kind of way where you can finesse something in to take out a group.
So now I got another question. So does that mean it's like a whole bunch of like size 1s or size 2 missiles, or is it a hybrid where it's a couple of missiles and a couple of guns?
So in reality,
in
reality, we already have that vehicle, which is the MT, the Cyclone. Now it's limited. The MT is limited in the number of smaller anti-air missiles that it has. But I think, I agree. If there's the possibility of having something with a ton of size 2s, that could be your anti-air close platform. Real quick though, like a couple of the things I want to mention that are downsides of this that you need to consider when you're looking at it. Not that you should add this to your fleet, but if you're looking at what its purpose is, the first thing would be it has no beds and none of the features. Same thing as all the other of the Atlas platform. It's one of the things that we know is coming to it is that it's that stability factor. Those arms don't work yet, but eventually, this is not going to be a move and shoot vehicle. You can move and shoot while you're you can shoot while you're moving, but there's going to eventually be some type of recoil and stability issue, which is going to affect your accuracy. So you're really going to want to set up once you put those stabilization arms out, same thing as the Ballista, it's going to not move quickly. The vehicle's going to take some time to move. And one other one, which is currently not an issue with this vehicle now in game. Right now, if you fire it, I've watched a couple of videos of some of the other content creators that have got their hands on this. It never hits the capacitor, right? It just instantly, people are just holding on the trigger and it's just going. That's not going to be a thing in the long run. Eventually, there's going to be a limitation on the power plant or those capacitors, which are going to really make you control your burst and your fire. Yeah. And that's something with CIG generally that I get a little irked about, is it seems like when ships are released, they're given kind of the open, it's endless fire, it's endless this, the shields, you can't get through them.
I think it'll change between the PU and release, and I can give you a couple of examples. The main one I'm remembering is the Redeemer. The Redeemer was amazing in the PU. It was awesome, and then just before it released, they nerfed the absolute crap out of it. They doubled the speed of the turrets, and they made a move like a bathtub. And she didn't move like that, or that have that turret problem. So I fully believe what you just stated there. Yeah, they'll bring in things like ammo limitations with the capacitors and stuff like that. But I did chuck up the image of the MT here, so just people can see that turret there to see that what we were talking about. Kind of like a hybrid between missiles and lasers. In this case, it's got a machine gun. But imagine something like that on the back of the Atlas platform, and I think you kind of get what Ese is talking about there. All right, Ese, you've got a couple of images here for us. I think these are the variations you want to talk about, or is there some other stuff you want to talk about before we move on to variations?
I mean, let's see. No, I mean, we could move on to like potential other Atlas platform
Yep.
changes and vehicles. Yeah.
All right. So tell us about this one. What's this image just showing us?
So this is a APC slash, this isn't a striker, but APC slash striker type of scenario where you're seeing, so we talked about modularity in turrets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the platform, the Spartan itself, the Atlas platform and the Spartan version of it, when it came out, the one thing I thought it was missing was a ground-to-ground anti-tank capability.
Yeah.
Not something that makes it an offensive platform, but a defensive countermeasure to a large armor. And that's a real thing in the world. So what this represents is showing that there's a remote turret. This is a current system, a Crow system, which is a remote turret. And on that system, if you can go to the next image and actually show what the turret is.
Yep.
You're looking at an anti-armor, actually you can use it for anything, but it's designed to be anti-armor missile, rocket, excuse me, guided munition. That little lens at the bottom is actually what does the sighting. And then you're looking at a Modus on top of that to provide anti-personnel and anti-armor capability if it's uranium.
It's funny you mention that because the missiles on the Ballista do have big googly eyes, or lasery googly eyes like that as well. So it makes me wonder if they eventually may become dual use, where you can paint your target. I'm just curious.
And I'm hoping so. We had talked about this when we did the M2 episode, I think, a long time ago, where there's a lot of gameplay for your ground units if you add that functionality, because it extends your range. If the range of a ballista missile is 20,000 meters, you're not going to see that from a ballista. But if you have a unit on ground lasing that target, they can guide that munition in. So, and it's the same thing with, and we can get it. I'll talk about this in a minute in another platform idea. But in my mind, this is what's missing from the Spartan. Something that makes it not a soft target for, like a tank. Yes, it'll destroy it in one hit. 100% that should be a reality. But giving it some type of countermeasure to that would make that tank think twice about, do I really want to take this risk as a lone tank going in and hitting the Spartan? Limited anti-tank, maybe 2 or 3 missiles basically, but not anti-air missiles, although if you're lucky enough, you can maybe hit a Redeemer with it or something like that if it's close enough. But something to really be an anti-ground. And this type of turret to me also could be utilized for other vehicles or other platforms. I'd like to see those turrets swappable. If this...
I was going to say, I was going to ask Drazz3n, do you think something like this is really going to add to the gameplay? Because I think the interaction between, say, on-foot soldiers and a vehicle is a really cool interaction. And I'd actually almost like to see this on more than just, say, a ground vehicle. I could also see this technically on, I think when we did that A2 episode essay, we talked about laser painting in general, but I could also see even just missiles like this on a fighter that just flies in and it fires the missile and it just goes. Is that, do we have anything like that today? Like, are they on multiple different platforms, Jason?
No, I mean, it's kind of, the missile platform that you're seeing on this Modus, that looks to me, and I believe it's just a differently assembled javelin, which is essentially one that a foot soldier could carry as a man-pad, a man-portable platform. They just decided to kind of Frankenstein it onto a Modus, which is cool. But it's great like that, because then a foot soldier can carry and use the same rocket as this vehicle is. So there's some interchangeability there. I don't think it's going to extend to fighters and ships, but I think you will see some interchangeability. Like we could see some things on, that foot soldiers use to be used on vehicles, or on fighters to be used on vehicles. But I think jumping from a fighter to a ground soldier, or either way is going to be a little more difficult, but there is some interchangeability there. And the main reason I think this would be great is to add different levels of combat. Yes, you might be coming across an APC with this weapon system on. Yeah, it might be meant for tanks, but do you really want to bring your ship in that close to see if that guy is skilled enough to hit you with that? Because I think you should be able to dumbfire any kind of missile system like that. It gives you that flexibility to say, hey, I'm going to try this out. Let me see how good I can do, to just add different levels to the battlefield, which I think is critical to capture as they're adding all of these different vehicles. Is let's see what the players choose to do with these. Let's see how they decide to utilize them.
And we haven't even come back to different ammo and missile types as well. So like EMP missiles and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I can see this being a very broad system, but the interactivity between foot soldiers and ground vehicles, I really like that idea. Is there any other ones that you'd like to go over? Is there just other platforms you think that may exist? Or nope.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few. I mean, maybe we can go back and forth, Drazz3n. Do you have one that you want to discuss first? Or
I don't know. I think the command and control one is definitely one I want to discuss, but you could probably touch on it more than I can. But that's just something that I have experienced.
So that would be in the back of the Spartan. So like
I would be in the back of the back. That would be the one coordinating, ships, providing, suppression to ground targets. That would be coordinating different groups of infantry and armored cavalry on the ground. That would essentially be the brains of the operation that isn't in the air.
It would be a imagine going into the back of it, and then one side is just filled with screens, like as you sit down, and you can toggle through them, and maybe two people sit down, and it's basically a Blue Force tracker, right? It's going to show you where your people are and where you believe enemies are, and you can give commands to your individual units. So if you have 10 tanks and 5 ballistas and 5 Centurions, a ton of Cyclones out there doing maneuvers, trying to attack an enemy, this is that vehicle that can tell each of them, like, you see the big picture, you see in like little dots. It's like its own mini game. You as the commander can see where everyone is and where enemies are versus radar, and it would probably have a gigantic dish or something spinning on top of it, extending the view out so that you get a bigger picture of the battlefield.
Do you think they'd try and put a command and control globe in there instead of screens? I'm just curious, because that seems to be the way they've gone in this game. Yeah.
It would be ambitious, I think, but they could do it. It would just take. It's such a small inside of a vehicle, right? To put that globe like we normally see, it's
mini globe.
Fairly ambitious, yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the other ones we talked in the episode that we recorded that didn't go to air. So I remember you did a medical one. You showed me one that had different, and these were all based on real vehicles. We had the images. We probably should have got the images again for this one, but yeah, it had one that had like 4 beds in the back of it. I think it was for like to carry
litters, to carry injured, an emergency medical. It's not a surgical theater piece. It's just for stabilization to bring them back. It'd
essentially be the Cuddy, but a ground vehicle. Like that's kind of what I took from it.
If it had a bed, I would think that the bed would be closer to the litter that the Apollo has. All it does is pick up somebody, bring them in so that you can drive them back. And maybe we don't know what those litters will do yet, but my hope is that they would slow down the process of the injury. So if it's a critical injury, it would not stop it, but it would slow it down to a point where you bring them back to a medical facility.
They're only a recovery drone, so essentially it'd be like a recovery drone and maybe 1 bed, but that's all you would get. But that would be enough to get people out of the combat zone and back to something more important.
100%.
So yeah.
And then
I'm trying to remember the other one.
We had
the auto defense turret, like the is it J Toll?
JWAC, like something like that would be ideal. Now that we have the Centurion, I don't know if we're going to see that. I think that those are similar overlapping grounds.
It's just that one is kind of AI controlled, where the other is player controlled. So I don't know about that as like well, the other thing is it lowers the vehicle down to 1 person. Then you see. So it could be, it'd almost be like putting blades on.
I was going to say, what about blading? Yeah. What about just blading the Centurion? Is that a possibility? And then that essentially covers that.
And you just put Gatling guns on it instead.
Yeah.
And it would be the same thing, but a turret at a. So if they had made it like an installation one where you can do it without the vehicle, it would be exactly the same. It'd just be blades and Gatling guns. So yeah, that's true. You can get around that one. I'm trying to think if there's any more.
I have a list here. There's a wrecker, so something that would be a recovery vehicle. Now that could also though be combined with a transport. So I could easily see a flatbed. So if you're operating these right, we've talked previously about the Vulcan coming in and doing resupply, but if you don't have air dominance, you may need a ground vehicle. So imagine like the same platform as the Ballista in the Centurion, but just a flatbed with maybe a tractor beam on that front turret.
Yeah. So
it would
and that's for
lift crates and take crates off.
Okay, so it's not like for recovering a Nova tank or a Cyclone. It's just transport. Like
it could have maybe skids on the back that come down, and then you can use that tractor beam to pull a vehicle on and take it out. That's a possibility. But you could see a wrecker / transport, and you're going to need it. The transport you talked about a fueler, like a fuel truck.
Oh, that's right, we did.
But you could also then use that flatbed to put tanks of fuel on. So, there could be one ground vehicle, like a flatbed, that could have multi-purpose range on the battlefield.
Now, Drazz3n, these are all grounded in reality. These are all things that you guys told me last time we did this. They're all based on real things, yeah? That these are not just you guys pulling stuff out of your ass. You're actually I remember we went through so many variants, and that's where I was like, they could literally, like, as a Atlas platform, they could literally almost take this anywhere they want to go. Now, I think the obvious question from the title of this video is how cheap do you think they're being with that? Would you rather them be unique variants, or what's your take on it?
And that's essentially, the main thing I wanted to drive home here. 3 times is the charm. We've seen the Ballista, we've seen the Spartan, we're seeing the Centurion. Clearly, they are on a path of variance and not modularity. That Atlas platform is modular for CIG, but it is not one that they seem to be wanting us to have as a modular platform. They make more money off of it, of course, and the cost of that is you're stuck with whatever variant you buy. But it's great for the long term because we'll eventually be able to buy them in game, right? So we can have a bunch of cool vehicles. So
I would argue they are slightly two different variants. I would still say the Ballista and Spartan are separate enough, but I would say the Ballista and the Centurion are literally variants, right? And I could actually, like, up until this point, I could argue, yes, the Spartan and Ballista are different, but I would hope in the long run, and Ese, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I would hope in the future that they are modular and you could go between the two. So there really is only the Ballista and the Spartan, and you can just change the guns on it. I would hate to think I have to buy a whole new vehicle just to go between missiles and guns. But
unfortunately, I don't. I agree with Drazz3n. I think that it's a mistake by CIG. I think that, so first of all, X, I agree with you that you have a shell back and then you have a flat bed. And I think that, our flat back. And I think those are the two hulls, as we see unique hulls, those are the two hulls, and that the Centurion and Ballista are potential variants on that flat back hull. Like a flatbed transport vehicle will be a variant on that flat back hull. I think it's a missed opportunity for CIG because I think if they made them modular, they would sell a lot more of those kits. If they had a base,
I think they could have justified the price, is what what you're trying to say, yeah?
Yeah, like I think if they had just a base vehicle, and granted, if you bought a Spartan, you would get the shell itself, and then whatever particular, the seats or something, whatever would go in there to make it use a Spartan. Hopefully, eventually, I really hope CIG, if you watch this, add a very basic Crow anti-tank, anti-personnel system on the rear of that Spartan, because it needs it. It needs to be a striker. It's not a full troop transport. It just isn't. So give it some value to the ground, make it relevant, and make it something that is not completely soft. But anyways, getting back to the point, I mean, I agree with what you were saying, and I agree with what Drazz3n was saying, is that if they made it modular, it would have more relevance to players, and I think they make more money, because I would then look at it and say, maybe it is worth me putting the money into this base model and then getting the Centurion turret for $25 or $35, or getting flatback transport turret, bed for the vehicle, the tractor kit, like very similar to the Vanguards.
It
Like
would've
I bought all the BUKs in the original concept.
it would have been a really good test study, or whatever you want to call it, or the the first test of modularity. I think it would have been a really good way to go because it's smaller and easier to work on than some of the bigger stuff. And I think you're right. I think CIG's got a mature enough audience that they can see now what they're doing. And I think a lot of people are going to realize. And the number one question I'd have when they do a Q&A for this thing is this eventually going to be modular with the Ballista? That would be the number one question I had.
Yeah, they're the same vehicles. It's just a different turret. And I know visually they're visual cues similar to the Vanguard series that they've added that make them look visually different outside of the, like there's a different rear. It's just all visual. There's nothing different at the core.
Essentially, isn't it just a different rack? One has a rack that holds missiles. The other one has a rack that holds a gun.
So I was looking at a comparison of the two images, and they could have updated the Ballista slightly that I've noticed because I haven't seen a Ballista game for a long time. But there's cues on the back, even on that rack, visually that are different, slightly different artistic differences on the. And I'm sure if somebody got into a deep dive, they'd find like this is a different color on this panel. This is like this is gray on this one and black on this one, and that's just what CIG does to make the hulls different. But you're 100% right. There's no real difference in those two vehicles. I mean,
I actually wonder what long-term gameplay consequences that has. Because think about it, if you can just be at somewhere and modify it, again, if you're out in the field and you just want to take the guns off, so you could use a tractor beam and take the missiles off rather, and then the racks off, and then you put the gun racks back up and put the guns back on. Or you have to go all the way back into town, so to speak, and grab it and bring it all the way back. So I actually think it's got gameplay connotations too, if they keep it that way. So I wonder if this is a marketing team versus design team thing again. So
I think Drazz3n hit the nail on the head. It is. Like, I think we see that, right? I mean, it's clearly the same platform, just adjusted. I mean, there are other variants that we could see. We could see an artillery version. Which is like a round artillery version. We could see a rocket pod version for rocket artillery. Very simple on that flatback. We could see
one I haven't mentioned that I did bring up last time that I've just remembered is the one where I talked about a shield generator one. Because it's 1,000 years in the future, and we know they've talked about shields in the past. So I think this is 100% a mobile shield generator at some point.
Yeah, call it a phalanx. The phalanx. Yeah, there you go. Generates a shield over a particular distance, not too large, but enough to be able to take in some serious, like maybe survive a direct hit from an A2 with minimal damage.
Yeah, and maybe it's only got like a battery in it, so it after a couple of hits it's decharged or something, or it's got a recharge or whatever. So you need two of them to totally cover an area or whatever. But
it's limited. Maybe you leave it off because you don't want to drain that piece. You have to turn it on. It generates a particular time. There's gameplay there, right? You have to be aware. Maybe the command and control version of it. And this is one of the things I wanted to bring up with command and control that we didn't cover is that the beautiful part of gameplay is not just the mini game. It's that if you put a radar suite or you make one of the radar suite on it, that extends the range of view. The picture that you see, the common operating picture.
It extends the missiles on the Ballista as 100%. An example. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I can actually, funnily enough, in a really weird way, see a whole series of these working together. And even part of like a military convoy, rolled in there with cyclones and novas and whatever other things that come along down the road.
Redeemers and A2s in the air to maybe this thing can see further because it's dedicated and command and control, and it's picking out targets for the A2 to hit. Hey, I can see 25 kilometers away. The A2 can't see that. There's a target there. Hit that.
Yeah. Well, all right. Unless you guys have got anything else to add, I think we'll wrap it up there.
That's it.
Drazz3n, anything from you? Final thoughts?
No, I just think my big take home here is to continue seeing the variance versus the modularity. Bad choice on their part, but I think we'll still think us as players will still benefit in the long term with it, just in the short term. Yeah.
Just real quick then, do you actually think in the final game it'll still be separated, or do you think they will make it modular? Just curious what your thoughts are there.
I didn't bring my crystal ball,
Yeah,
so I wish I could say.
It's more of a hope, isn't it, than a dream? Yeah.
If I'm hoping and dreaming, yes, I'd love to see it, but I don't spend my money on hopes and dreams. Wait, why do I play Star Citizen? But no, when it comes to that, I just don't feel comfortable enough with how they're taking the Atlas platform so far. That leads me to think that they'll ever make it modular. I hope they do. That would be great, but I don't know. I think there is some value in only having variants and not having much modularity. So,
Ese, your final thoughts?
I think the Centurion gives us an insight into what the future of combat is. But one of the things that I want to really point out to everyone is that this is a lot of focus now on ground combat. They're clearly moving in this direction for a reason. They're refocusing on ground. We're looking at the Venet Orson that's going on, are about to start right now. They're looking at the FPS combat. Clearly, they're revamping. They're looking at this as really a test of that SPS combat and the gameplay around it. Then we're looking at this, and we're clearly seeing battlefield ground maneuver combat. And they're really looking at that joint operation, air power, vehicles, and then manpower. And I think that tells us what direction they're going in with the design of the game. And I think we're going to start seeing much more focus on planet side because that's what they're developing towards, and there's clearly a reason why they are.
A few months back, they actually mentioned that they plan, alongside the 200 spaceships on release, they now want to have 100 ground vehicles. And I think I worked that out recently. We're not even at 20 vehicles. I could be wrong. I might have to go back and check that number. But that's a lot of vehicles that I was not expecting.
And they're doing it quickly. Like this is far more rapidly than we've seen ships.
Because they're smaller. And I think if you can go back over the last few sales, every sale, there's been a vehicle now.
And they're not concepts. I mean, that's the thing that
they're straight in. They're
straight in. And I mean, to me, and I'm going to beat this horse dead as many times as I can. I still believe, in my core, that this is moving towards theaters of war. Like they're looking at, you need these pieces for ground combat battles.
They are 100% Battlefield-like battles that I would expect in a game that has a bigger map than Battlefield. And when like I said, that interaction between soldiers and vehicles on the ground, like that gameplay just sounds amazing to me. Like, think about all those times in Battlefield you've had that 5 or 6 tanks just holding out and you can't break because you're going in with tanks. But if you can fire a missile in that they can't counter, it breaks the stalemate. And you and those cool little gameplay dynamics that you just don't see in other games that we already have in really simple things, what they call emergent gameplay, is just going to be such a higher level in this game, way more tactical than you get in an average first-person shooter, which is, let's be honest, most of the first-person shooters these days are just Twitch shooters where it's the first person to click the head wins. But anytime you have that plus some tactics, the game just instantly gets more depth. And I just think the potential for depth in this game is ludicrously, I'm not even pronouncing that word right, crazy though. I'm sorry, I'm tired. It's now 2 a.m. Okay, I think I've deserved bedtime. So yeah. All right, well, with that, then we'll wrap up. I'd like to thank Ese and Drazz3n for joining me on this. This is the last time you'll see the beard. I'm going to shave it off. So when I look different and non-hobo, don't freak out. But I will be flying to Sydney this Friday for a Bar Citizen. I'm hoping to meet up with Croncy, General Desperado, and of course Algrid. I'll see if I can get a little small video to put up of me and Algrid meeting for the first time. And we're also hoping to possibly record an episode at the Bar Citizen. Don't know if that'll happen live or if it'll even happen, because I have to borrow other people's equipment to get it done, because here in Australia you can only travel with 7 kilo. And I am way more than 7 kilo. No, just kidding. Yeah. All right. With that, I thank you again, Ese and Drazz3n. Oh, so that's been Ese. That's been Drazz3n. I've been Execute. And catch you in the next one.